Hiya, typical. It's a Joey Reynolds greeting, and I have with me today one of my really favorite people in the world. We've spent so much time together off campus and on the air, and he's probably the best writer we have in the country. Biographer is exceptional, and biographical about everybody that you ever liked or didn't like, and he tells you the truth too. And so I have here Marc Eliot. Now, when you look him up, it's not M-A-R-K, not like the evangelist. It's Marc, M-A-R-C, Marc Eliot, and it's one L. So I always make that mistake. You know, I want to go to Marc Eliot on the computer, look him up on Google. It's M-A-R-C-E-L-I-O-T. So that's it.
You get some grocer in Kansas if you.
You're lucky. Some guy in Beijing bought my name.
Really?
Yeah. But I want to start this right. We should wear a mask, you know. I think that's the only important thing to do. So let me do that. Does this work for you?
I thought you were Donald Trump for a minute.
Yeah, no, don't bring that up. We try to not use the T word on the show. We don't. Everybody talks about this all the time. It's enough already.
I don't blame
you. It's just like Jesse James. You know, you're no longer famous. Now you're notorious.
Yeah.
So I'm in Florida, Marc, and you're in New York, right?
Same place.
You're in the city in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I came to Florida because I want to look young, so I hang around with older people. And it's I can't find people too much older, but I'll tell you something. I was with a friend of mine who has a mother who's 104 years old, and the problem she had is she liked older men. Now, you and I have spent a lot of time on the all-night show on WOR and also on my TV show and at the Friars Club, and your books have always been fascinating and wonderful, and I've gone to your conferences, so I'd get that out of the way with the credential that you are writing what right now?
I'm writing a biography of Merle Haggard.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, you know who Merle Haggard is.
Oh, sure, country artist out of Nashville.
Out of Bakersfield.
Like I said, I don't know who he is.
It's part of the Bakersfield sound, you know, Buck Owens, yeah. Merle Haggard, Dwight Yoakam, and it's a great story. It's a story of survival, redemption. It's got all the elements of bigness that I like in biographies. Very complicated character. His writing, as good as Bob Dylan's in his own way, led a tumultuous life. You know, when you write biography, it's like a detective story. You start off with a crime, which is the life, and then you try to put together the pieces and try to figure out why this person did what he did, felt the way he did, why he achieved success, what the struggles were, and little by little, it comes together. Some stories are more dramatic than others. A couple of years ago, I did Charlton Heston, I really enjoyed that. It was a good story. It wasn't as dramatic as John Wayne was, which I did 2 or 3 years before that. But, you know, every once in a while, I like to flip over from movies to music. And I find
it started with Phil Ochs.
Started with music, that's right.
Yeah, and then you moved along to the history of music also.
Right.
Like that, famously.
Yeah.
And I think, if I recall, the Disney takeover of 42nd Street.
Yes, right. And the Eagles, and of course our friend OJ.
And let's not leave out Erin Brockovich.
No, please don't leave her out. And Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart, Clint Eastwood. You know, there was
my favorite. Well, you missed my favorite. There were 2 of them. Steve McQueen.
Oh yeah, Steve McQueen.
And the main reason I wanted to have you on today is so that you could tell me the James Brown story.
I wish I could. I didn't understand it when he told it to me. You know, it was so. James, tell me about your job. I understand, but could you clarify that for me?
So you went to this house to visit him.
I went to visit him.
What was that like? Tell me what it was like.
He lived right across the border from Georgia. I think it was in South Carolina, because he had a dispute with his hometown, something about a statue that they wanted to put up, or they didn't want to put up, and so he got angry and he moved to the other side of the river, which was the other state. And I flew down there to write the book. And I was greeted by his manager, Mr. Bobbitt. You remember Mr. Bobbitt?
Oh yeah.
And he picked me up, and on the way over, he said, "Now, don't forget, always call him Mr. Brown, and don't bring up stuff that he doesn't want to talk about." I said, "Well, like what?" "Oh, you could talk about anything. Just don't bring up what he doesn't want to talk about." "Okay, I'll make a note of that." And we got to his house. He had, in the middle of his living room, he had, if you think of a Cadillac Impala, the upholstery in the round, and you just sat looking out into the living room as if you were in some gigantic Chevy Impala. And then after I was there for 5 or 10 minutes, the lights went down, a spotlight came on over his bedroom door, and he made an entrance. It was a James Brown show. And he came out, and he looked superb, the 10-foot wig and tight-fitting clothes, big smile.
Did he have a cape? What did he have? The cape?
The cape. Sat down next to me, but looking away, because the thing was a circle where he looked out. So I was kind of with him, but not with him. Anyway, I spent 2 or 3 hours that day. Great. He was so open and so perturbed about the music business, all the stuff that I always feel privileged to see and hear up close. These are idols usually that when you get to see them, they're either smaller than life or larger than life. They're never life size. And he was both smaller than life and larger than life. And after 3 or 4 hours, he gave Mr. Bobbitt that look, and Mr. Bobbitt stood up and said, "Well, I think that's a great start for today. Really wonderful. So I'll take you back to your hotel." We got in the car, and Mr. Bobbitt said, "Mr. Brown really, really likes you. He doesn't usually like writers, but he really likes you." I said, "Well, that's great. And what time are you picking me up tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? Tomorrow, to continue. Mr. Brown feels that you have everything that you need to know about your life, that you can go ahead and write it." I said, "Well, wait a minute. It's a biography. I only spend 4 hours. Mr. Brown feels that you can fill it in, and just whatever you write will be fine, as long as you keep those 4 hours intact and just build around it, and you'll be fine." I said, "Well, I really can't do that. I've got to see him again." "Well, I don't know if he's going to have enough time." "What is he doing?" "Well, he's not doing too much, but." I said, "Please tell Mr. Brown that I need a few more hours." Oh, the next day I went back, the Naugahyde seats, the lights down, the entrance. We did another 4 hours, and another great 4 hours. That was finished. Robert stood up. "Okay, I think we've really covered it today." Got back in the car. I said, "And tomorrow, Mr. Brown feels that you have everything you need to write. You go ahead and you write this book. Any way you want to, be fine with us." And so it was like that every time I wanted to see him. And I went with him. I flew in his plane with him to New Jersey. He was playing Atlantic City. He was doing the old convention center where the Miss America contest used to come from. And he killed it. I mean, he went out there and he killed the place. The audience was flattened by him. He like Springsteen. When Springsteen did The Bottom Line, he played The Bottom Line like it was Madison Square Garden. And if you were in that room, The Bottom Line in Greenwich Village, that great club that used to be there, if you were there that night, you felt like, an atomic bomb went off. And you were just flattened by it. Well, he was the same way. James Brown was the same way. It didn't matter if it was a big venue, if it was a little venue. He just exploded in his show. So I had a good time with him. I enjoyed him. When I finished the book, I called Mr. Bobbitt. I said, the book is done, so let me run it by you, and you can make any correct. Mr. Brown feels that he doesn't have to read the book. Fine. I personally, I know you, and you're a great guy. I know this is going to be a great book. And that's basically what it was my impression of James Brown, which is what made it into the book. And the reviews were remarkably kind. Mr. Brown was never so open and never so revealing. Amazing. What a power I have. I didn't realize that.
Last night I was watching a PBS special on Martin Luther King. Yeah. And Martin Luther King special shows that on the day he was killed, there was a performance by James Brown in Boston.
Yeah, big deal.
Yeah, and he killed, I was going to say he killed the crowd. That's not a good expression for this time. No. But he was really very exciting on stage, and they started to riot, and he calmed everybody down. And he got the cops from stopping their reaction. And he was a calming force during all of that. Did you know that, or was that in the book?
I talked to him about that, and that was in the book. They actually asked him to go and do a show, hoping that he would draw all that energy into a positive place. Because if you remember, after that assassination, I mean, this country was really tightly wound, and it was ready to explode, and did explode in several cities. He went, he did the show, and sure enough, as he got into it, the young people in the audience started to get out of control, and they started coming on the stage, and the police, who were there to keep order, got their sticks out and they were ready. And James Brown, no, don't do that. And he brought these kids on stage and let them vent their frustration. And it turned out to be a positive, wonderful evening for him and for them. And, that's the kind of stuff that he never got a lot of credit for. He went to Vietnam. He entertained troops in Vietnam. Nobody ever wrote about that. They always wrote about the other stuff with him, the temperament and the women and this and that. But he was actually a very decent guy. I always found him that way.
And it's a man's world with Pavarotti when he did that.
Absolutely.
What a tremendous performance that was.
I remember. It was Pavarotti. I sang with Pavarotti. Pavarotti did something with everybody. Look, do you think I can do a few tunes with you? Sure, come on now.
So that's a garbage truck going by. I think I'm too late.
Ready for me to do it.
It's just one of those things. I'm outside, of course. So I'm not really. I'm in a bird cage because we have a bird and kept. And I'm in her space right now.
I can hear it. I can do it.
I have to ask permission to tweet. So what I want to ask you is about the. There's a couple of things. You did the Bruce Springsteen book too. We should say.
Yeah.
As long as we mentioned it. I mean, you've done all these famous people, and they were misunderstood until I heard a lot about them. Now I met Steve McQueen years ago. Just to give you a little background, I worked on a movie called Schlock, which was produced by Jack H. Harris out of Philadelphia on the Drive-In Theater, which we're back to right now again, I think, for entertainment. But anyway, Jack Harris decided that he was going to make movies, and he made a movie called The Blob with Steve McQueen.
Blob, sure.
And he was, and the next film out was Schlock, which was John Landis, the director who did American Werewolf and also the Michael Jackson stuff. I did the trailers for him and the commercials. So anyway, the thing with Steve McQueen, Jack tells a story about how years later he was with Ally McGraw, who was in Love Story with Brian O'Neill at Paramount, and she also wound up with the president of Paramount, if I recall. Anyway, Steve McQueen had taken and bought he wanted a beautiful home. And he went to Jack Harris's palatial estate in Malibu and knocked on the door. This is years later, after now he's a major star. And he tried to buy the house from Jack. Jack says, I threw the punk off my lawn. He says, what an insult. It was to buy my house, and I gave him his start. I don't know if you ever knew that story, but your book about him is great. And I meant to tell you that before when you were writing it.
Thank you. You came to hear me speak at, where was it? It was at the Y, the 92nd Street Y, but it was downtown. You went to the wrong Y, remember that? And you ran down. That was a good day. I really felt connected that day to that crowd when I was trying to explain who he was. She was actually married to the head of Paramount, who did all the Chinatown and all those films, and left him to marry, to be with Steve McQueen. It was an interesting marriage. He did wind up in Malibu, but a little further north and in a kind of a shack. And he pulled the phone off the wall. He pulled the mailbox out of the ground, and he really wanted her to be barefoot and pregnant, as the expression goes, and didn't want her to pursue her acting career. He was very possessive, very insecure, and she did for a while. She kind of gave up her career to be his wife, and it never really she never really recovered from that. But he was such a strange guy that where nothing really worked except when he was in front of a camera, then everything came together. Like so many actors who you read about their lives, the industry of the wreck of their lives that we have in this country about, this one, that, and the woman who tried to get the kid in school. But when they come on screen, everything pulls together like some kind of magnetic force, and that's their greatness, is their ability to project a kind of idealized version of life on screen or on stage or on record, and then they revert to real life. And their real life, the connection between their real life and their image is what I write about. How they make that magic leap, how you go from real to ideal. And that's really the thrust of all my books. And you will see it in force with Merle Haggard, who just redeemed himself. He was in San Quentin. I mean, his life was a disaster until he redeemed himself. I'll tell you an interesting quick story about Merle. He had been arrested 17 times as a teenager in Bakersfield, Oildale, which is right next to Bakersfield. And the only thing that he did that wasn't criminal was he liked to play the guitar because his father was a fiddle player who wasn't allowed to play because the mother thought it was devil's music and all of that. So Merle learned the guitar as a kind of a tribute to his father. And even though he was robbing stores and holding people up, a real delinquent, he had this quality where he could go on stage and everybody would love him. And eventually, he wound up in San Quentin. A judge finally got fed up with him being dragged in front of him every 2 weeks for robbing a grocery store or stealing a car or whatever, and threw him into San Quentin for 3 to 15 years, an indeterminate sentence. While he was there, he opened up a still in his cell with his cellmate, and he was selling what they call orange beer, which is beer made out of orange peels, and running a gambling thing. I mean, really irredeemable. So the warden threw him into death row, into a cell on death row. And who is the guy in the next cell? Carol Chessman. Remember Carol Chessman?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Who went to the gas chamber.
Serial killer.
Wasn't a killer. He was a rapist. He never actually killed anybody. He was the only person to be executed in California for a non-lethal crime. He had raped a woman And he had gone to San Quentin. This is before they changed all the laws. He was on death row for 12 or 13 years. He became a celebrity. All the stars wanted him, not to be executed. Anyway, Merle was his next cell neighbor. And, of course, Merle loved him. He's the ultimate outlaw for Merle, the ultimate great guy. And Chessman, who wrote a few books, he was a smart guy. He was an intelligent guy. And he warned Merle that if he didn't straighten out, this was going to be his fate. And Merle, the day they took Chessman to the gas chamber, he walked by Merle's cell and he said, goodbye. So years later, when Merle started writing his own songs, the song Sing Me Back Home is all about Carol Chessman. And so the redemptive value of being put in that situation, he was somehow finally able to turn his life around. And after that, he went to the top. There was nobody bigger in country music than Merle Haggard. He was up there with Johnny Cash.
And speaking of that, Johnny Cash was on the outside of prison, and he belonged in there. He was another guy. But you know what? Wait, you brought up an interesting thing. He's the consummate outlaw, but so was Steve McQueen.
Absolutely.
Steve McQueen was a rebel with a cause. Now, wait, I have this Renegade shirt. That's why I wore this today. Because of this.
Me too. Renegade shirt. No, mine's just black like Johnny Cash.
But, the thing with Steve McQueen, you said some very interesting things that I don't think people would know unless we brought them up about he was really genuinely an outlaw.
And he was a real kid, yeah.
And he was a disconnect.
Yeah.
What'd you say? And I forgot how you described it.
Well, his mother was a prostitute, and he was brought up by an uncle who didn't want him. He enlisted in I think it was the Navy. He was aboard ships. He was thrown into the brig for fighting and just a tough guy to get along with. And it was in the brig. He was assigned to pull all the asbestos off the pipes down below. Of course, that years later turned into mesothelioma, which killed him. When he got out, he was working as a plumber in Greenwich Village. He was doing day work, fixing pipes, because he had learned that in the Navy. And he met a girl who he went to fix her sink or something down in the village. And she said, you're a good-looking guy. You ought to try to do some acting. And this was in the day, and I think it's still true, that if you go into the military on the GI Bill, they'll pay for your education. In those days, when you see movies from the 60s and 70s, all those character actors, they all went to acting school on the GI Bill and somehow broke into film, right? And they all did it for the same reason, to meet girls. They all wanted to meet. And so they figured, well, the best way to do that is to, where are the girls? Well, they're all actresses. So let's go to study acting. And we'll meet girls. And that's why Steve McQueen did it. He when she said, you're a good-looking guy, you ought to be an actor. And he said, well, how do you become an actor? She said, well, you can go to acting school. And the story I told that day that is so funny is that, he was a rough kid. He had no real upbringing of any sort. So he went in, he was at the neighborhood playhouse, which was a very famous acting school in the village, still there, and it was method acting. And so they put him into an exercise with a girl. And, the exercise basically was they give you an opening line and a closing line, and you improvise to get from the opening to the close. It's a good acting exercise, and you work your way to, you kind of write the play while you're with each other. And that's the exercise. They did it. The director of the class called him over on the side and said, look, in the middle of this He called the girl over. He called the girl over. He said, in the middle of the scene, I want you to slap Steve McQueen. Just slap him in the face. And really? Yeah, just let him have it. And let's see what happens. Okay. They go back and they do the exercise again. And in the middle of the improv, she slapped him in the face. And he punched her in the face, went backwards, tumbling, and hit the wall. Sandy Meisner, who was the director. That's the greatest thing I've ever seen. You are a born actor. And he then called up the head of the Actors Studio and said, you've got to see this guy. He is amazing. He's the next Marlon Brando. They called it, he went over to the Actors Studio, auditioned, got in, and from there, he got onto live TV. And that's how he got in, by punching this girl out. Meisner kind of set up, knowing that Steve McQueen had no fuse, not a short fuse, no fuse. And that was McQueen. That's how he got by in life. Rough, and again, he was able to take all that negative energy, that hostility, that rage. But when the camera came on him, it turned into the most beautiful, poor, misunderstood boy that women just wanted to save. They wanted to save him. And all the women that he was involved with, his first wife, who was there the whole time, even when he was with other women and married and all of that, she still felt that she could save him, that he was redeemable. And that's something you can't learn at the Actors Studio. Yeah. You can't learn that at the neighborhood playhouse. You have to have that. Bruce Springsteen talks very candidly about his own success. And he says, you have to have the instrument. You can be the greatest songwriter, you could be a great singer, you could play a great guitar, but if you haven't got the instrument, you'll never make it. And he acknowledges that he had all the pieces. He had the look, he had the sound, he had the songs that he wrote, and he lived it. He lived it down there in Asbury Park, where from the age of 10, he was a bar kid. He was playing in bar bands. And, it took 10 years for him to become Bruce Springsteen, the one that we knew and almost didn't make it even then with the first 2 albums. So it's, there's an indefinable quality that I try to define in my books. What is it that makes these people who they are? And so
these are on the outlaw side, and there are a lot of disconnecting. But on the positive side, which you also now that's your duality. You went to the other part with Erin Brockovich. See, you took a wonderful. She's a great lady, and a very good friend of yours. And I love her. She's a really good person. Yeah,
she was on the show with us one night.
Yeah, and she's got a wonderful way about her, the way she believes things should be, and she's still doing that. This is not just a movie, No,
that's who she is. Yeah. And, when we got together, she and I, she's dyslexic. So it's very difficult for her to organize her words. She's great instinctively, which is what the whole movie was about. But when it came to organizing it and getting it down and figuring it out, she really relied on me, and fortunately, we had a fantastic chemistry. I mean, we could sit in a room, and she could talk for 2 hours, and I could have 10 minutes of exactly what I wanted. And maybe that's what I'm good at, but it takes two people. You need to be able to hear that and know what she's trying to tell you and give it back to her. And so I wound up writing her speeches for the next 20 years. And she would have to then memorize them and go and do them because she was lost. So
Tom was good with her, though, her lawyer friend.
Oh, right? Tom was great. He passed away, but he was played by that actor in the film. But in real life, he was a fun guy. I really liked him a lot. And he could also see in her a greatness that everybody else, Masri.
He was a genuineness. There was a genuineness, I think.
And instinctiveness. You know, a lot of lawyers and people who become lawyers, and I have great lawyers, and you have great lawyers, and we have great lawyer friends, but a lot of them lose the vision when they get down to the nuts and bolts, and it's winning a case, and it's, I'm going to be stronger than you, and I'm going to this, and I'm going to that. She didn't have any of that because she wasn't a lawyer. But she could see very clearly when the emperor had no clothes on. She could say, hey, the emperor's naked. And that it's a gift. And she had that. And you know, the way the whole film and book was shaped was that it happened from that car accident. And I used to say to her, you know, the opening of the film, she gets into a car wreck and Masri defends her. And that's how she gets involved with his law firm. Fate, you know, what Aristotle used to talk about, character and fate, that your character defines your fate. Her fate was this accident that she was able to then turn into something very positive for her. And I always admired that about her, the fact that she never lost the focus and never lost the belief that she needed to help other people because she knew what it was like. She knew what that living in a trailer was like.
After all this success, she then went for another cause.
Yeah.
For the clean water in Beverly Hills, I think it was.
That's right. Underneath the Beverly Hills High, no less.
I mean, that's her. That was her. You're right. It was her.
If you think of that film, the Barbra Streisand film, The Way We Were. That's right. That's her. You know, at the end when Redford remarries and he runs into her, and what is she doing? She's
handing out pamphlets.
and that is Erin Brockovich, not Jewish Erin Brockovich, but.
Now, you and I used to go to. We would go out a couple of times, and we went to see Jackie Wilson's story. At the Apollo.
Yeah.
And it was never on Broadway. It was a great performance by a newcomer who had his chops, and also Melba Moore was in the show. She played Jackie Wilson's wife, I think. But you know, we've had a lot of real life experience too with these characters, these people.
Yeah.
And even one of your books, I happen to be in the Cary Grant book, so I want to brag about that for a minute.
That's right.
Cary Grant book. Cary Grant had an interesting way about him too. He was a disconnect, but not known as that. He was thought of as an.
It goes back to this ability that they have, this magic that they have when they're on screen. You know what he used to say. Everybody wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant. Is what Cary Grant used to say. It was a joke. But it wasn't a funny joke. I mean, to him, it was very real that if he could only be that guy, you know, what a life he would lead. When I wrote Cary Grant, and I remember, I believe I came on your show with that book. In the beginning of the book, I talk about the magic. And I say that what I'm going to do in this book is I'm going to show you how the trick is done. And when you learn how the trick is done, the magic will disappear because you'll see how it's done. But what's great about movies and about biography, I think, is that by the end, the magic comes back. Yeah. So, you know, you see it, you go to see a Cary Grant movie or you watch it on TV, it's all there. And you know more and you can appreciate more deeply who these people are by feeling that you know them more than just on a screen. And that, you know, I never intended to be a biographer. I intended to be a safecracker, but I couldn't get it.
Well, Mickey Freeman, who was our favorite comic from the Friars, and my favorite joke of Mickey's is that he said the hotel was so cheap that even the postcard had the beds unmade. You know, I mean, I love that. I could tell that 100 times, but so did he.
I had to tell, he did. I used to, in between stealing the locks on Friday night.
On my show. But he said he admired me because of my relationship with Diane Cannon, which he found out through you.
That's right. I love.
He said he didn't like me. He didn't like me until he heard that I was out with Diane Cannon, and I said, "How'd you hear about it?" He said, "Marc Eliot's book on Cary Grant." I said, "Oh."
Yeah, he was a beautiful guy.
Oh, I love him. I love Mickey.
He was the real thing. He was the real thing.
Or spell comic, but extraordinary. And he kept it going. And he never got off his game. Never.
No. Right up until the end. Yeah. I mean, he just again, you can't learn that. He had that. He had that ability. You can fine tune it. You can temper it. You can sharpen it. You can practice it. You can hone it. But you have to have the instrument, and he had it. And that, I love that when you see it. It makes you feel that the world, there is some meaning in this world when people can exhibit that and communicate on that level. You know, I was going to tell you that. I got into biography because Phil Ochs was my best friend for when he was alive. And when he died, I decided that before anybody else got in and ruined the story, that I would tell it the way I knew it. And his family was great about it. I wrote that book. And
his great song, what was it called?
Cops of the World.
Right. We are the cops of the world.
So we used to play that song on your show, and management would come in and say, I'll do a commercial before we... I loved him. He was and very inspirational to me. And, you know, today, fortunately for me, I was able to make a career out of biographies and other, related writing. And film and all that.
Well, you're the best. You're the best at it. And I'm going to cut you short for 1 second because I don't want to leave this without you telling about this. You know, we have a virus going on right now. Everybody knows it. I mean, that's not the most entertaining thing to think about right now. And I love your stories are great, and it takes us off of the seriousness of that. Now I'm going to sound like a CNN guy. But what I wanted to like Wolf Blitzer from Buffalo. Yeah, I got that Buffalo in me. I wanted to.
Amazing.
Never going to lose that. I want to ask you about Walt Disney.
Yeah.
Because there's a dark side to Walt Disney, and they've kept this game going even to the point of where they bought Star Wars. I mean, and the theme parks and the network, they own ABC, and now they're redoing the show again. The Disney show, and they're taking advantage of this pandemic by putting their artists on sing-along with America. They know how to market everything. They market it well. And yet there was a side of him, which you wrote. There was a side of the company, and specifically him, wasn't it?
Well, all this stuff that you're talking about, it really came after Walt's lifetime. He died in '66, I believe, and the company almost went under. There was a takeover attempt that his brother, Roy Disney, actually prevented by continuing to split the stock, and that's how the company survived. It was a Texas billionaire who wanted to buy the company, and it was Roy who was always the businessman. Walt was the guy, hey, I want to make this movie, and I don't care how much it costs, and and Roy would say, well, you've got to watch the bottom line, you've got to watch the bottom line, and actually how they survived. His brother was the only guy he could trust. But the dark side really had to do with two things. He came to Hollywood late. He came in 1922. And by then, the old boys club of studio heads, mostly European, mostly Jews, had already formed. And he couldn't break into the major studio. He couldn't get distribution. So he was always at the beck and call of RKO, Columbia, Fox, people that would kind of be his boss and not letting him make feature films. He could only make 3 or 4 minute cartoons. There was no money in cartoons. So it wasn't until he made a Snow White in 1937, which is 15 years later, that he actually found a way to make himself more of a force in Hollywood. So the first thing was he was an outsider. And the second thing was with HUAC. He was responsible. He was a major force in bringing the blacklist to Hollywood because of a strike that took place at his studio in 1945. You know how Hollywood would strike like the auto industry. You choose one maker and you strike them, like you strike Ford or Chrysler, and it affects the whole system. They struck Disney because they thought he was the weakest studio, and it was a union thing. They wanted to start a new union because they felt that all the unions were corrupt. And Disney wouldn't settle with the animators. You know, Uncle Walt, he wanted it to be a family, and they wanted to make some money. So that union led him to believe that all the unions were infiltrated with communists. And in order to solve that problem, he brought in, along with Sam Wood and a few others, they brought in HUAC after the war, claiming that Hollywood was filled with communists, and that was the basis of the union movement. And of course, there was a lot of anti-Semitism tied in with that, and all of that, you know, played against the image of Uncle Walt, because to the public, don't forget he was a producer primarily, a studio head. How many studio heads had any identity? They had a name, but if you said David O. Selznick, I guarantee you that nobody in the audience knew who David O. Selznick was besides a name.
But they knew Howard Hughes.
They knew Howard Hughes, and he was a kind of a rebel, and famous not for RKO, but famous for the airplanes, and womanizing and all that. Alfred Hitchcock, because of television. Because Alfred Hitchcock presented, good evening, ladies, that whole thing. So people knew who Alfred Hitchcock was. And Walt Disney, primarily because of the Walt Disney program, Walt Disney World. And that came about because ABC, the network that he was affiliated with, had no content. They had no programming. And he made a deal to let them have his backlog of cartoons in exchange for giving him a TV show. That saved ABC, and that made him a figure, a visible figure, and made enough money for him to buy the land to create Disneyland, which you know was supposed to be in Burbank, but Universal bought the land out from under him and built Universal's amusement park, and he had to go all the way out to Anaheim, where he bought an orange grove and turned it into a Disneyland. So it's a great story, and again, it's a story of someone overcoming all the negatives to create something on screen that is so powerful. And
I'll tell you a story about him. He was trying to get money for Buena Vista, and that was in Burbank. And so he was trying to get the money together, and the bank wouldn't loan him any. And they went for money to get the property going, and the bank turned him down several times. So he in his great wisdom, figured out how he would present it. And what he did was he went to the bank and he presented the plan as being a convertible physical plant that could be a hospital with wider aisles in the plan in case they failed. And that's how they gave him the loan.
That's right.
But that's brilliant. I mean, you know, this is, and he wasn't even a businessman. His brother was. But
he wasn't a businessman at all. That's why he couldn't get the loan. But he was a creative genius.
Yeah, Imagineered.
Yeah, the Imagineers and the 9 Old Men. I mean, I interviewed, I think, 4 of the surviving 9 Old Men. The 9 Old Men were his senior animators. Right. And he named them the 9 Old Men after the Supreme Court. That's how they got that name. And several of them were still alive when I was writing the book.
Willis Pyle. And Willis just died. He was a good friend of mine. And he did Pinocchio and Snow White. And we went to the Lincoln Center where they conducted the orchestra for Fantasia, which he worked on. And there was no sound from the film, but the full orchestra of the suite of Tchaikovsky. It was a wonderful performance. And Willis got up. He was 90. He was 99.
Yeah, well, they would be up there. Because Fantasia is, what, 1941, I think.
Yeah, and now let me bring this around because I want to. This is you're a very social aware person. Now Willis wanted to put a monorail around L.A. and he helped. And you remember when I had the hydrogen car, and I was from General Motors, and I drove everybody in that thing, saying it's $12 to fill it for a week. You know, when gas was $4 a gallon. I said also it's no noise. And it has a governor on it, not Como, but it has a governor on it where it wanted to go faster. And I brought everybody in there, and including Peter Bogdanovich, remember? You know, and yourself, of course. Yeah, I know. And I couldn't get anybody to bite on the hydrogen part. They're doing the hybrid. Toyota was on phase 6. No, General Motors is on phase 6 of the hydrogen development. And incidentally, that's not how the dirigible blew up. It was not a gas explosion. It was a design flaw from Germany because Hitler wanted to have a dog and pony show, and he sent it to Lakehurst, and it was supposed to be their pride and joy, but the design was flawed. It wasn't the gas that exploded. Hydrogen does not explode. So I want to mention that because socially, that would give us a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about now, because here's what I want to pick your brain. Mark is one of my favorite people in the world, and he's not only a writer of everybody else, but he's also a free thinker and has developed a lot of relationships in China too, incidentally, a long time ago in a galaxy far away, correct?
And still to this day.
And Mark is an interesting study. You could do a book on him if you had the chops. But Mark had so many. I mean, there's so many other books too that you've done. You've done so many biographies, but we could go through the whole list, and someone should go to your website or Google you. But I want to get this in because this is significant. We are celebrating right now the virus that we have as being a game changer, they call it. And then there are those who want it to be the way it was with the economy, and then there are those who think that we have a level playing field now. And I saw on 60 Minutes there was a scientist, purely a scientist, no other angle, talking about how he wanted to report that Mother Earth was revulsed, like this thing here. The Mother Earth was happy to have the relief of the non-poisonous air and the water cleaning up and perhaps the ice caps restored and all of this cleansing of the planet because we've been so abusive with it. So where are you with that as far as your writing, your thinking, and social attitudes? Because you're smart. I want to ask you that now. That's the long setup for the Marc Eliot, E-L-I-O-T answer.
Without getting political, because I don't think we want to get too political here, right. The Chinese people are nothing like the way people who haven't been to China think they are. Just like the American people are not the way the Chinese people who live in China, who have never been to America, think the American people are. China has always been very good to me. I spent a lot of time there, especially on the western side, Shangri-La and all of that. It's one world. It's one world. I personally don't believe that there was any plot to destroy America, because you destroy part of humankind, you destroy eventually all of humankind. And I don't even believe it came here directly from China. I think it came from Europe, because New York City is an international hub. But the politics get in the way of clear view. And what you're witnessing now is a political battle, a re-election battle, a competitive battle, a financial battle. And the real battle should be one of survival and coming together. China has a lot to offer this world. Their system may be in trouble. It may not be in trouble. Our system may be in trouble, may not be in trouble. But eventually, when you get to the top of the pyramid, all the systems are the same. You've got a lot of people. You've got to feed them. You've got to shelter them. You've got to give them reasons to live. You've got to educate them. You've got to take care of them when they get older. It's all the same. And if you don't lose your focus that we are a human species, not a Chinese species, and not an American species, and not a French species, although French species is pretty good. We are a human species. You have to work together. And if we didn't have all this posturing and one-upmanship and pandering and ignorance, this would have stopped a long time ago, because the human animal is a pretty smart creature, and it can certainly overcome adversity. Thornton Wilder wrote a brilliant play called The Skin of Our Teeth. And, that's really what it's all about. You get by the skin of your teeth. That's how close it is. But we make it. We make it. And I'm optimistic. Fortunately, usually when I'm writing a book, like I am now, I don't know if you can see behind me, but all of that's Merle Haggard in paper. I'm very occupied right now. This is a good time for me because, as you know, when I'm writing, I live inside that subject. So I don't need to be out in drinking in bars, women. Well, yeah.
You might also want to go to your place in Woodstock.
I just came back from there.
Yeah, so let's throw that in here. I mean, you're not you're still a hippie wannabe.
A hippie number one. This is because I can't get it cut, and I'm living here anyway. I might as well, take it easy. But I was just up there, and I love it there. I've been there 50 years, and it's a great place to write. But I've been doing a lot of traveling. I was in Guatemala. I was a visiting professor running a film class in Guatemala and University of Guatemala, and it was fantastic. These kids just, without being drenched in American teen culture, these graduate students at the university just took to these films so beautifully and so openly. They were talking back to the screen like the old routine that Lenny Bruce used to have. But this was, these kids were actually, nobody had ever talked to them about film, I guess, the way I did. But it was a great connection. And I'm going to go back again for another month next year. And, Freedom Fest and out west at Stanford. So every once in a while, I need to dip in to a social milieu to keep my sanity. One of the things that I loved about doing your show was that I could come out of the cocoon for 4 or 5 hours and be around people who were interesting, fun, competitive, and enjoy that social realm, and then come back and be energized to do more work.
That's why I loved you. Same thing.
I still do it. I never phoned it in Merle. I am immersed in Merle right now, and I believe it's going to be one of my better projects. But to me, age or money, none of that is a consideration. It's the work. As you well know, it's the work. And that, to me, is the most satisfying thing of all. Look, I may get married this year. Something that I have been putting off for a few millennia. But, I believe that life, you live it until you don't live it. And so I want to live every moment of it. And a lot of it is vicarious in a way, but that only charges my battery to want to get out there and live as hard as I can within reason. So it's always good to see you. It's great to see you today. I feel energized from this, and probably going to write 400 pages after I get off.
But you know what? You're starting to lose your memory because you forgot the head of Paramount Pictures. And the kid stays in the picture.
Yeah. What the heck was his name?
Robert.
Bob Evans.
There you go.
Bob Evans.
And he married Ally McGraw, for those who want to reference what we're talking about.
And he's the one that she left him to marry McQueen when they were doing The Getaway.
Right.
And, you know, Bob Evans got wind of it and came down, drove in his Rolls Royce from Hollywood to Mexico where they were shooting. And big, tough Steve McQueen hid. He was afraid of confronting Bob Evans.
Well, the guy wrote produced The Godfather.
That's right. I mean, you know, and Benedict's in the movie.
And Rosemary's Baby.
Yes.
So listen, here's what I would like to do. I want to leave this on a continual note. I would like to have you come back on any time at your choosing, whenever you want to take a break. And I wanted you to talk about the music in your rock. What was the rock and roll book? What is it called again?
Rockonomics.
Rockonomics. I want you to do a whole show on that because I want to play the music, also the videos as you describe them.
Sure.
You know? And I think you know, you have done so much research on it. And we hung out together with the Richard Nader concerts. You know, we've been through a lot of things. We're culturally, I'm not starving for culture.
No, we're not.
You know,
Though you almost got killed at one of those concerts when you made a comment about Obama, and I thought it was like the end of the Frankenstein film. Remember, they chased you out.
Well, I forgot that I was talking to 16,000 rednecks, and I said the White House is going to be the Black House.
That's right.
And they had a fit with me because
they chased you to the river. They were, you know, with torches. They killed this guy.
And they were laughing at everything else I said. I said, you know, Phil Spector hasn't changed a bit. He's always been the #1 guy with a bullet, you know, on Billboard.
Sorry. And that's a good example, though. There's a guy who was so nuts and so crazy and so whatever, but you put a Phil Spector record on and you're in heaven.
And still.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to let you go. So you go back to Merle Haggard, and with my blessing.
Thank you, oh Father.
And you know, I'd love you to come back and do that thing, okay?
Yeah.
Great. Marc Eliot, don't forget to look him up, buy his books. They're all available online. He's my favorite author, so.
MarcEliot.net, that's all you need.
Oh yeah, the .net part. Okay.
And then
I thought you worked without a net. This is a bad joke. Let me get the hell out of here. It's the Reynolds rap. Let a smile be your umbrella and don't get a mouthful of rain.